Thank you, Dr. Brenna. And I'll just explain how we're going to run these sessions today. It's a little bit, everyone has 15 minutes. Speakers, if you run over just a little bit, don't worry about that flashing red light that's telling you that your time is up. But it's a little bit like TED Talk, and so the reason for this is so that everyone gets a little bit of something throughout the day. This next session, I'll ask each speaker to come up, and then one at a time, go back down, and then at the end of the talk, we'll ask all 4 speakers to come up for some Q&A, and we'll have microphones around for you to ask some questions. So in this panel, seafood omega-3s and brain health implications, we'll start off with Captain Joseph Hibbeln. He's the acting chief for NIH NIAAA, and he'll go over brain health and seafood and omega-3s, followed by Dr. Robert McNamara. He's a professor of psychiatry and behavioral neuroscience at the University of Cincinnati College of Medicine and director of the lipidemics research program, followed by Dr. Adina Michael Titus, professor of neuroscience at the Center for Trauma Sciences in the UK. And then we will have Dr. Bill Harris call in. He's president of Omega Quant. And so afterwards, you'll have a chance to ask them some questions. So first, I want to bring up Dr. Joseph Hibbeln with NIH. Thank you.
Good morning, and I'm delighted to be here. Last year was a wonderful session and symposium, and of all the good charities in the world, I think that the Seafood Nutrition Partnership really needs to be applauded for its efforts to educate and promote seafood because it's so critically important for human health. I'm a captain in the United States Public Health Service. I would like to give this radical message that everyone with a brain deserves good nutrition. And as Tom showed you, at least for the dietary guidelines for Americans, most people are deficient in the amount of seafood that they're eating, and most of the work has been done in looking at the implications of that deficit for body health, but we really need to look at nutrition above the neck, because that's what makes us human, and that's what is the delight of life, is to have a good mind and have a good family. So I'm not talking about the role of seafood or nutrients for super health, to make people extraordinarily smart and brighter in Montgomery or Fairfax County. I'm talking about the role of nutrition for the most impoverished, for the most poor, the people who especially eat most of their calories, from fried foods and food stamps. It's huge question. Because seafood is important to the brain, we must look at the great phenomenology of disease of the brain, which is psychiatric disorders. And it doesn't take much to get your brain off kilter and fall into a depression or a severe anxiety disorder. The costs, the burden of mental health and psychiatric disorders increased 41% between 1990 and 2010, and now accounts for 1 in 10 years of lost health globally, resulting in a huge amount of economic burden to healthcare systems and economies. What if nutrition is part of the prevention of that flow of enormous costs and human health? And what if we could prevent that? It's projected that by 2030, this sum is expected to nearly double if a concerted response is not mounted. Now, where are we at the state of the science? In 2015, the first time the dietary guidelines of Americans made one sentence about the role of nutrition above the neck. This is the 21st century, and I'm just delighted that they wrote a sentence down, which is fabulous. We moved the needle. And it says, that emerging evidence suggests relationships may exist between eating patterns and neurocognitive disorders and congenital abnormalities. And the basis of that from the scientific guideline looked first at dietary patterns and lower risk of depression, And because they only looked at dietary patterns, they only looked at observational data. So today, I want to help you unfold a little bit the data beyond the dietary patterns. By the way, just today, I received a Wall Street Journal article describing 2 different randomized placebo-controlled trials effective of healthy diets compared to other diets in treating depression. So it's now about 4 or 5 randomized placebo-controlled trials of entire dietary patterns showing causal reductions in depression. So what do we mean by a dietary pattern? Well, that's a cluster of foods that you typically eat together. Now, if you go beyond the dietary patterns, you need to look at the specific foods in the dietary patterns and really assess what foods or combinations of foods are causal. I'll look at the data in depression for dietary patterns, specific foods, especially fish and olive oil, and then specific nutrients within those foods. Fish is a very complex and beautiful food for human brain health. It's got omega-3 fatty acids, which likely work in synergy with iron, with vitamin B12, with micronutrients. It's what the brain needs to eat. Here, however, we'll look specifically at the case of omega-3 fatty acids and their blood status in depression, and then look at randomized placebo-controlled trials of these specific molecules, EPA and DHA, in treating depression. And I'll say a few things about the mechanistic basis, which we can only do a little in 15 minutes. So, data on Mediterranean diets and depression. These are observational trials. Back in 2011, there was a meta-analysis of 9 studies with a very large number of people. I think it was in the several thousands. Then people consuming a Mediterranean diet were 30% less likely than their peers to have depression. That's the basis of the one sentence in the dietary guidelines. Now let's unpack the foods in those diets, and let's look at fish consumption specifically. So Lee, in 2005, looked at a meta-analysis looking at 150,000 people in 26 different studies, and reported robustly that people consuming higher levels of fish were nearly 20% less likely than their peers to have depression. This is solid, robust data supporting prevention. Now let's look at status studies, again observationally, the next level down. Look at EPA and DHA in the blood of people with major depression and without major depression. 14 studies, 3,000 participants, a huge effect size. That G is 0.85 with a lot of p-values behind it. Again, strong associations that blood status, which is reflecting brain status, is lower in major depression. Now let's get to the brass tacks of randomized, double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled trials. This is for omega-3 fatty acids. It's not even for the other components of fish. We know vitamin B12 has a big impact in depression. So EPA and DHA in major depression, we did a meta-analysis in 2016, which is supported by 6 other meta-analyses that EPA-rich formulations appear to be effective for people with depression. Many other people have done studies, and the populations that they studied didn't have depression, and the depression didn't get better. I throw those studies out. So when we divide the studies, this is on the x-axis, people with clinical depression, people without depression, without depression. Without depression, there's no effect size of either EPA or DHA. You don't have the symptoms, you can't reduce them. Now, in people that have a clinical depression, this is a scatter plot of the effect sizes of each of those studies. When the formulation has larger amounts of DHA than EPA, it's not effective. When it has larger amounts of EPA than DHA, the mean of them is quite robust and effective. So clinically, it's critical to note things called effect sizes. Is this a little bit of effect, or moderate, or strong? So about 0 to 0.3, that's mild. 0.3 to 0.6 is moderate. They're strong. So here's EPA in people with clinical depressions, an effect size of about better than 0.8. How does that compare to antidepressants? Well, they're about 0.3. How about psychotherapy? They're also about 0.2, 0.3. These are useful and should be combined in therapy. But I posit to you that the physical biology of restoring the adequate nutrition of the brain is fundamental to its function. And we should help do that first before we spend money on pharmacology and psychotherapy. I wanted to talk just a little bit about mechanisms in this brief period of time. We did, I especially did this for Bob McNamara because he has such better fMRI neuroimaging data than I do, but I sort of like, I'm like hamburger helper, and I helped, So we did a randomized placebo-controlled trial of omega-3 fatty acids compared to placebo, supported by Barlean's Organic Oils LLC, lovely people. And we used adults who have attention deficit disorder, and they have deficits in reward processing. One of the mechanisms we believe from basic sciences is that omega-3 fatty acids support dopaminergic function and dopaminergic neurons, and we were fairly certain we know the mechanisms as well. That was part of Norman's work with Neur1. So we randomized adults with ADHD to 3 grams of omega-3 fatty acids compared to a macadamia nut oil placebo, did the fMRI test of reward function at baseline, and then after 16 weeks, the test was to anticipate reward, like you're anticipating the cocktail hour this afternoon. Sometimes it's better than the cocktail hour itself. The task is you see a target, and if you get it right, you're going to earn $5. And it's how the brain reacts in the time between you see the target and you're anticipating the reward. Here, this is a difference plot, a difference image. Among the placebo group, there was no change in activation of the brain from baseline to placebo. They reacted exactly the same at baseline and placebo. The active group had tremendous activations here in the bilateral insular cortex and the superior temporal cortex, and these are the brain regions that process what reward means. Process what reward means. Now, part of what this data indicates to me, not only is that there's a mechanism there, is that a deficit in omega-3 fatty acids translates into a deficit of being able to feel reward. A deficit in being able to feel reward. How can you get motivated if you don't feel reward? How can you have a love of life and passion for this great existence if your biology is incapable or deficient in feeling reward? This is, I posit, what we have the capacity to restore by going down this avenue of investigation. Finally, if I have 3 minutes left, heck. Finally, in this broad overview of omega-3s and the state of the art, I want to touch on one area that's near and dear to my heart, and that's our work in the reduction of violence and the reduction of aggression. And here we did a randomized double-blind placebo-controlled trial in Mauritius with Adrian Rain, one of the foremost professors of criminology and psychopathology. And we took kids, a community sample of kids, 8 to 16 years old, and randomized about 100 of them to omega-3 fatty acids compared to placebo in this beautiful Smartfish juice box provided by Smartfish in Norway. Lovely, tasty stuff. We gave the omega-3 fatty acids or placebo for the first 6 months. And then the intervention stopped, and we looked at residual effects at 12 months later. So here are the children's own ratings of their proactive regression, that is the aggression that they generate, compared to the reactive aggression when they're provoked how do they react? So the kids all reported that the kids in the omega-3 group during the trial had a substantial reduction of their perception of their own aggression, about a 40% reduction. The parents and the teachers reported a residual effect of a large effect size, 40% reduction in the children's delinquency and delinquent behaviors. Not only how the kids felt they were reacting, but how the delinquent behaviors the kids were foisting on others. I mean, this is huge. If this replicates and translates to broader populations, this means that maybe we can reduce delinquency by giving the brain adequate nutrition. Wouldn't that be wonderful? Shouldn't we know if this works or not? Shouldn't we test better if it replicates? So the parents also saw reductions in the child's internalizing behaviors, those are depressions and aggression, and a residual effect in reducing callous and unemotional behavior. That's the core of sociopathic behaviors, which are difficult to change. Now, what we also found remarkable was that we gave the kids omega-3 fatty acids. The parents didn't get it. We gave the kids the omega-3 fatty acids, and it changed the family dynamics. And we looked at what happened to the behavior and the reaction of the parents. So the parents' psychopathology scales went down at 6 months and stayed there after 12 months. When you quiet down the most disruptive people in a family or in a society, these are data that you have spreading beneficial effects. It's, well, how could it happen? The molecules didn't get into the parents' brains. Well, we're humans. Our behaviors affect one another. A graduate student then, later after we published these, dug through the data and found not a huge effect, but a statistically significant effect of a reduction in intimate partner aggression scores. So it wasn't only the parent's psychopathology. We have a hint that this may be helpful in reducing the parents' violence and aggression towards each other. And we're now funded and conducting that trial specifically to follow up to see if this data is real. And that was, and then the reductions in the children's externalizing behaviors correlated with a reduction in this intimate partner aggression score. So we're pretty sure that it was the child's quieting the kids down that helped the parents get better. So I want to thank you for your attention and Linda for inviting me.